The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Shadow Creek as 5 riders approached, their black dusters collecting dust from the trail, weapons gleaming with deadly intent. They couldn't have known that the town's new sheriff, the quiet man writing in his ledger with his reading glasses perched low on his nose, was once known as Steel Eye Thorne, the most feared gunslinger in the territory with 47 notches on his gun. Their mistake would cost them everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if this tale speaks to you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. The year was 1885, and the notorious Bishop Riders had just crossed into the Arizona territory. Leading the pack was Jackson Bishop, a towering figure whose scarred face told stories of violence that would make even hardened men shudder. The jagged mark across his right cheek came from a prison fight where he'd killed 3 men with nothing but a broken bottle. His younger brother Wesley rode beside him, obsessively polishing the ivory-handled Colt that had already claimed 9 lives in the past month alone. Behind them, their loyal followers maintained a watchful formation. Rattler Ramirez, whose tracking skills had helped them evade the law across 3 territories, scanned the horizon with eyes that missed nothing. Big! Mike O'Malley's massive frame dwarfed his horse, while Cole, the Kid Sullivan, brought up the rear, eager to prove himself worthy of the gang's bloody reputation. Jackson Bishop had chosen Shadow Creek carefully. The small mining town had struggled since the silver vein ran thin, leaving half its buildings empty and its people desperate. Their previous sheriff had been gunned down 3 months ago, and word was they'd only managed to find some bookish replacement who spent more time writing reports than wearing his gun. As they passed the sun-bleached welcome sign, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds in the drought-stricken earth, Jackson noticed a man sitting at the sheriff's desk through the office window. The stranger was bent over some paperwork, his reading glasses making him look more like a schoolteacher than a lawman. His gun belt hung on a peg behind him, out of reach, a mistake no experienced lawman would make. "Look at our new lawman," Wesley sneered, loud enough to carry. "Probably doesn't even know which end of the gun to hold." The gang's laughter echoed off the empty street, but Jackson remained quiet, studying the scene with the instinct that had kept him alive through countless robberies and shootouts. The new sheriff, Lucas Thorne, didn't react to their mockery. He continued writing in his ledger, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the sunlight. What the Bishop gang couldn't see was how his steel-gray eyes tracked their every movement in the reflection of his office window, or how the fingers holding his pen had once been the quickest draw in the territory. Inside the hotel across the street, Emma Lancaster watched the scene unfold through her window, her hand clutching the silver cross at her neck. She knew the sheriff's true identity, or at least pieces of it that he'd shared during quiet evenings over coffee. She'd seen the mysterious symbol burned into the grip of his Colt, though he'd made her promise never to speak of it. The Bishop gang tied their horses outside the saloon, their spurs ringing against the wooden sidewalk as they swaggered through the swinging doors. They didn't notice how the sheriff's hand had stopped writing mid-sentence, didn't see the way his posture shifted ever so slightly, didn't realize that for the first time in months the legendary gunslinger felt the familiar tension of an approaching storm. Young Katie Hayes watched from the general store window as she restocked shelves, her heart racing. She'd heard whispered stories about the new sheriff, fragments of tales that painted a picture of a man whose gun had brought both justice and tragedy. Her grandfather Samuel had warned her never to mention the time she'd seen Thorne practicing at dawn, drawing and firing with a speed that seemed impossible, his shots so precise they could split a playing card at 20 paces. As the saloon door swung shut behind the Bishop gang, Sheriff Thorne carefully removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate precision. His movements, despite their careful slowness, carried an underlying grace that seemed at odds with his scholarly appearance. He nodded slightly to Emma Lancaster through the window, a silent signal developed over months of careful preparation. Emma understood. It was time to quietly spread the word. Trouble had finally found Shadow Creek, but it had no idea what it was riding into. The Bishop gang wasted no time making their presence known in Shadow Creek's saloon. Wesley Bishop commandeered the largest table, kicking over chairs and sending a pair of miners scrambling toward the door. Ramirez and the kid Sullivan positioned themselves near the windows, while big Mike O'Malley's massive frame cast a shadow over the bar. Jackson Bishop stood at its center, surveying his surroundings like a wolf sizing up its hunting ground. Emma Lancaster, who'd owned the establishment since her husband's death in '83, studied the newcomers with growing dread. In 15 years of serving drinks in frontier towns, she'd learned to read men like others read books. These men reeked of bloodshed. She'd already sent her young waitress, Mary, through the back door with instructions to alert Dr. Crawford. "Whiskey," Jackson commanded, dropping a gold coin that Emma knew had to be stolen. "Leave the bottle." His voice carried the coarse edge of someone who'd spent too many nights shouting orders over gunfire. When Emma placed the bottle before him, he grabbed her wrist. "Tell me something, darling. That man wearing the badge, how long has he been playing sheriff?" Emma kept her composure despite the iron grip on her wrist, remembering the quiet conversations she'd had with Lucas Thorne, the ones where his steel gray eyes seemed to look straight through her soul. 3 months now. County sent him to help with the bookkeeping. Jackson's laugh revealed a gold tooth that caught the afternoon light. "Bookkeeping? Hear that, boys? They sent us a goddamn accountant." His brothers roared with laughter, but Emma noticed how Jackson's eyes narrowed, studying her face for any sign of deception. Outside, Sheriff Thorne had moved from his desk to the boardwalk, maintaining the appearance of a simple afternoon walk. But his practiced eye cataloged every detail: the way the gang had stationed themselves, the quality of their weapons, the manner in which they carried themselves. These weren't common bandits. Their tactical positioning spoke of military experience. Dr. Crawford emerged from his office down the street, his medical bag in hand. Few in Shadow Creek knew he'd served as a field surgeon during the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. Even fewer knew he'd been the one to remove the bullet from Thorne's shoulder 2 months ago, when the sheriff had appeared at his door in the dead of night, refusing to explain how he'd been shot. The doctor knew a soldier's wound when he saw one, just as he recognized a warrior's eyes behind those wire-rimmed glasses. "Beautiful day for a walk, Sheriff," Crawford said quietly as he passed, his words carrying a hidden weight. It was their code, established during late-night conversations over bourbon, when Thorne had revealed just enough of his past for the doctor to understand what might be coming. "Storm's coming, Doc," Thorne replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Might want to prepare for casualties." His fingers, no longer holding a pen, twitched almost imperceptibly near his hip where his gun should have been. Inside the saloon, Wesley Bishop was getting rougher, breaking bottles and threatening patrons while his brother watched with cold amusement. Big! Mike O'Malley had discovered the back room where Emma kept her strongbox, his massive hands already working to break the lock. Across the street, Martha Wu was closing her laundry when she caught Thorne's eye. She'd come to Shadow Creek after fleeing San Francisco's violence, had recognized something in Thorne's careful movements the day he arrived. The same controlled power she'd seen in her father, a master of martial arts who taught her that true strength often hid behind quiet facades. Now she gave Thorne a slight nod and gestured to her shop's upper floor. He acknowledged with an almost imperceptible tilt of his head. Her building offered the best vantage point of both the saloon and the street, perfect for what might come. Young Katie Hayes slipped out of the general store's back door, moving quietly as Thorne had taught her during their secret shooting lessons. Lessons her grandfather pretended not to know about. She carried a message to Pastor Wright, who would ensure the town's women and children found safe shelter in the church's basement. Katie had discovered more about their sheriff than most. Had seen the mysterious brand on his gun's grip when he thought no one was looking. Had recognized the symbol from wanted posters she'd secretly studied in her grandfather's shipping records. The afternoon sun cast long shadows down Shadow Creek's main street as Thorne calculated his next move. In his previous life, before he'd traded his reputation for a badge, he'd faced worse odds. But then, he'd been a different man, one who could act without worrying about innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Now he had a town to protect, people who trusted him, a chance at redemption he wasn't sure he deserved. His hand moved to adjust the glasses he no longer needed, a deliberate gesture to maintain his carefully constructed facade. Soon he would have to shed this scholarly disguise, would have to become again the man whose name once made hardened killers tremble. But for now, he watched and waited, knowing that timing, like aim, meant everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside the saloon, the Bishop gang's true intentions began to surface like sharks circling their prey. Jackson Bishop leaned against the bar, his scarred face reflected in its polished surface as he laid out his plan to his men. Their voices, growing louder with each drink, carried through the thin walls. They'd hold Shadow Creek hostage, squeezing every business for protection money, then burn it all down when they'd taken everything worth taking. They had no idea that Sheriff Lucas Thorne was already setting his own plans in motion, his mind working with the same lethal precision that had once made him legendary. Through the sheriff's office window, he could see Cole, the kid Sullivan, getting bolder, harassing old Samuel Hayes, who hadn't evacuated quickly enough. The young gunman's Colt was holstered low, a showman's rig that spoke more of vanity than experience. 3 months of quiet, Dr. Crawford muttered, joining Thorne at the window. Suppose it was too good to last. The doctor set his medical bag on the sheriff's desk, the instruments inside clinking softly. 5 of them, heavily armed. Reminds me of Shiloh. Outnumbered, outgunned. Thorne's steel-gray eyes never left the street as he replied, "In my experience, Ben, it's not about the numbers. It's about the first move." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd learned such lessons the hard way. "You still keep that surgery room ready?" "Since the day you showed me that brand on your gun," Crawford answered. "Never thought I'd see the mark of the Ghost Riders again, though they all died in that massacre at Dead Horse Canyon." A shadow passed across Thorne's face. "Not all of us." His hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where beneath his shirt lay a matching brand. Sometimes surviving is the harder path. Across the street, Emma Lancaster was carefully moving bottles of whiskey away from the bar's back wall. She remembered the night 3 months ago when Thorne had helped her reinforce that wall with steel plating, claiming it was just a precaution. Now she understood. He'd been preparing for this day since he arrived. Martha Wu appeared at the sheriff's office door, her movements swift and silent. "My father always said the best position is high ground," she said in barely a whisper. "Second floor is ready, like you asked." She placed a small key on his desk, the key to her laundry's back entrance. Thorne nodded, the gesture containing volumes of unspoken understanding. In the 3 months since he'd taken the badge, he'd positioned his pieces carefully, building a network of trust with key members of the community. Each one held a piece of his true identity, but only Emma Lancaster knew the whole story, how the legendary Steel Eye Thorne had come to Shadow Creek seeking redemption for the blood on his hands. Through the window, they watched as Wesley Bishop emptied his revolver into the air, laughing as townspeople scattered. Each shot made Dr. Crawford flinch, but Thorne remained still, only his eyes moving as he tracked the gang's positions. "You've got that look," Crawford observed quietly. "Same look I saw on men's faces before the big battles, the ones who knew what was coming but chose to stand their ground anyway." "In the war," Thorne replied, finally turning from the window. "You fought because those were your orders. Today's different." He moved to his desk, opening the bottom drawer where a burnished Colt revolver lay wrapped in waxed cloth. "These people took me in, gave me a chance when my reputation should have condemned me. Sarah Hayes brings me coffee every morning, even though her hands shake when she sees my gun. Pastor Wright invited me to Sunday services despite the whispers about my past. Martha planted those flowers outside my office until I had something to look at, besides wanted posters." His fingers traced the mysterious brand on the gun's grip, a rearing horse surrounded by flames. "I didn't come here looking for redemption, Ben, but sometimes redemption finds you anyway." Katie Hayes slipped back into the sheriff's office, her young face flushed with purpose. "Pastor Wright's got everyone safely hidden in the church basement. she reported. "And I saw something else, and there were 2 more riders watching the town from the ridge. They've got rifles." Thorne's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. 7 against 1, he mused. Better odds than I had at Dead Horse Canyon. He turned to Dr. Crawford. "Get your surgery ready, but not for me. When this starts, there'll be others who need your skills more." The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across Shadow Creek's main street. In the saloon, the Bishop gang's laughter grew louder, more raucous, unaware that their every move was being watched by eyes that had once dealt death with surgical precision. "Time to make a choice," Thorne said quietly, more to himself than his companions. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses, folding them carefully and placing them in his desk drawer. When he straightened, even Crawford took a step back. The scholarly facade had vanished, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. Steel-Eye Thorne had returned. The sun's gradual descent cast amber light through Shadow Creek's dusty streets as Thorne moved with deliberate purpose toward his private quarters behind the jail. His boots, no longer carrying the hesitant step of a bookkeeper, struck the wooden floor with measured precision. 20 years of masking his true nature dissolved as muscle memory took over, each movement calculated, each step purposeful. His modest room revealed little about its occupant: a narrow bed, a desk with carefully organized papers, and a weathered trunk beneath the window. But beneath the floorboards under his bed lay the tools of his former trade, hidden away the day he'd accepted the badge. The loose board came up easily, revealing a worn cavalry weapons case he hadn't opened since arriving in Shadow Creek. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, lay his true companions, a pair of custom Colt peacemakers, their grips darkened by years of use. The mysterious brand marked both weapons, the Ghost Rider's rearing horse surrounded by flames. His fingers traced the symbols, remembering the night they'd been seared into both steel and flesh. The gun's bluing had worn in places, telling stories of countless draws, but their mechanisms moved like silk when he checked them. "I wondered when you'd open that case," Emma Lancaster's voice came softly from the doorway. She entered, closing the door behind her. 7 of them now, according to Katie. 2 on the ridge with rifles. Thorne nodded, continuing his inspection. "Winchester 73s, most likely. The Bishop gang always liked their long-range insurance." His voice had changed, dropping the educated tone he'd affected for months, returning to something darker, more suited to his true nature. "The town's asking questions," Emma continued, watching him work. "They've never seen you wear a gun, let alone 2. She paused, then added, "They don't know about Dead Horse Canyon." Thorne's hands stilled on his weapons. "No one knows the whole truth about Dead Horse Canyon. The newspapers got it wrong, called it a massacre. 15 Ghost Riders gunned down by a company of rangers." His steel-gray eyes met Emma's. "They never found out it was an inside job. Our own leader, Mason Cross, sold us out for a pardon and a badge." "Is that why you became a sheriff?" Emma asked quietly. "To make up for what he did?" A ghost of a smile touched Thorne's lips. "I became a sheriff because dying was too easy. Living with what I've done, that's the harder path." He checked his ammunition, each motion precise. "But today, those skills might save this town." In the saloon, the Bishop gang had grown bolder. Wesley's random shots had given way to methodical destruction. Big Mike O'Malley's massive hands splintered chairs while Rattler Ramirez carved his name into the bar top with a wicked-looking knife. Jackson Bishop sat watching it all, his cold eyes occasionally drifting to the sheriff's office. "Something ain't right," Jackson muttered, more to himself than his men. "A town this size, this isolated, should have more fight in it. Instead, they're scattering like rats. Organized like." Dr. Crawford worked efficiently in his surgery, laying out instruments with the same precision he'd used in field hospitals. Martha Wu appeared with clean linens, her movements silent as she helped prepare. They worked without speaking, the routine familiar from the night 3 months ago when Thorne had first revealed his true identity. "You knew this was coming," Crawford finally said, arranging his tools. "That's why you had me stock extra supplies." Martha nodded toward the window. He's been preparing us all. The reinforced walls in the saloon, the escape routes through the alleys, the signal system with the church bells. Like pieces on a xiang keyboard. Chinese chess, she explained, seeing Crawford's confusion. My father taught me that victory is determined before the first move is made. Outside, Shadow Creek had taken on an eerie quiet. The Bishop gang's laughter and occasional gunshots seemed to echo off empty buildings, while hidden eyes watched from carefully prepared positions. Katie Hayes moved through back alleys, delivering messages between the town's defenders, just as Thorne had trained her. 7 against 1, she whispered to herself, remembering the shooting lessons where Thorne had taught her more than just aim. But the one knows the ground. In his room, Thorne strapped on his gun belt, the familiar weight settling like an old sin against his hips. He'd spent 3 months building a life in Shadow Creek, creating something honest from the ashes of his past. Now, he would risk it all, become again the man whose name once made hardened killers pray. Emma, he said quietly, checking his guns one final time. If this goes wrong? It won't, she interrupted. This town needs you, Lucas. Not the myth, not Steel Eye Thorne, but the man who spent 3 months showing us what justice really means. He moved to the window, studying the lengthening shadows. The time for hiding was over. Get word to Martha. When this starts, her position will be crucial. And Emma, he turned, his steel gray eyes carrying the weight of unspoken words. Whatever happens, whatever you hear about who I was, remember who I chose to become. The sun touched the mountains, painting Shadow Creek in shades of blood and gold. In the saloon, the Bishop gang continued their revelry, unaware that death was about to revisit a gunslinger who'd tried so hard to forget its touch. The evening shadows stretched across Shadow Creek like dark fingers reaching for prey. Through the window of Martha Wu's laundry, Thorne could see every detail of the saloon's interior. Jackson Bishop had Sarah Hayes cornered now, his scarred face twisted in a mockery of a smile as he toyed with a silver dollar, flipping it between his fingers. Behind the bar, Wesley Bishop was methodically shooting bottles, each shattering pop making the few remaining patrons flinch. Your father taught you well, Thorne murmured to Martha, who stood beside him watching the scene below. This position controls the entire street. His steel gray eyes tracked the 2 riflemen on the ridge, barely visible in the growing dusk. Through the window's reflection, he caught Martha's slight smile. My father always said the best warrior is the one enemies don't see coming, she replied, adjusting a stack of freshly pressed linens that cleverly concealed a Henry rifle. Like you, pretending to be nothing but a simple lawman. Thorne's hand rested on his Colt, fingers tracing the branded grip. Sometimes the best disguise is letting people see what they expect to see. He moved slightly, keeping track of Rattler Ramirez as the gang scout began a methodical patrol of the street. The Bishops expect a frightened town, so they see one. They expect a weak sheriff, so that's what I showed them. Down in the street, Ramirez was getting bolder, testing doors and peering into windows. His Winchester repeater swung lazily in his hands as he approached Samuel Hayes' store. The old man hadn't evacuated fast enough, and now stood trembling behind his counter as Ramirez entered, the little bell above the door chiming with deceptive cheerfulness. Time to move, Thorne said quietly. He checked his guns one final time, then nodded to Martha. Remember the signal. He descended through the back of the laundry, his movements fluid and silent. 20 years of gunfighting had taught him that patience often killed more surely than speed. He'd spent 3 months learning every shadow in Shadow Creek, every creaking board, every angle of sight. Now that knowledge would become a weapon as deadly as his revolvers. In the saloon, Jackson Bishop was growing suspicious of the town's organized evacuation. Wesley, he called to his brother, take a ride around the outskirts, something ain't sitting right. He turned to big Mike O'Malley. You and the kid checked the church, town this size should be hearing prayers by now. Thorne watched through the gaps between buildings as the gang began to split up, exactly as he'd planned. Divide and isolate. The same strategy that had made the Ghost Riders legendary before Dead Horse Canyon. He moved like a shadow through the alley behind the general store, timing his steps with Wesley's horse hooves to mask any sound. Inside the store, Ramirez was threatening Samuel Hayes, demanding to know where the townspeople had gone. The old man's voice shook as he claimed ignorance, but his eyes kept darting to the back room where his granddaughter Katie hid with her fingers wrapped around the derringer Thorne had given her. "Your first shot has to count," Thorne had told her during their secret lessons. "Because sometimes you only get one." He'd taught her where to aim, how to steady her hands, when to breathe. Now he prayed she wouldn't need those lessons. Dr. Crawford watched from his surgery window as Wesley Bishop rode past, the younger Bishop brothers' ivory-handled Colt, gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. The doctor's hands moved automatically, arranging his instruments as he'd done in field hospitals during the war. "Like Antietam," he whispered to himself. "The calm before the storm." Emma Lancaster had positioned herself in the saloon's back room, pretending to take inventory while actually monitoring Jackson Bishop through a small hole in the wall, another of Thorne's careful preparations. She watched the gang leader pace, his confidence beginning to crack as the town's silence worked on his nerves. "Something ain't right," Bishop muttered again, his scarred face reflected in the mirror behind the bar. "A town this size should have more fights, more panic. Instead, it's like they were expecting us." Through the window, Emma saw Thorne's signal, a slight movement of his hand as he passed between buildings. She reached beneath the bar, fingers finding the hidden lever that would drop the steel shutters Thorne had installed 3 months ago. "Just a precaution," he'd said then. Now she understood. He'd been preparing for war since the day he arrived. Martha Wu's voice suddenly rang out in rapid-fire Chinese, the foreign sounds echoing off the buildings. Right on cue, Katie Hayes began ringing the church bell in an irregular pattern, the sounds seeming to come from multiple directions as they bounced off the surrounding hills. The effect was immediate. Wesley Bishop wheeled his horse around, momentarily confused by the disorienting noise. Thorne allowed himself a grim smile. Confusion, distraction, isolation, the same tactics the Ghost Riders had used in their prime. But this time these skills would protect rather than destroy. He moved into position behind the general store, knowing that Ramirez would soon step out to investigate the commotion. "The best shot," he'd told Katie during their lessons, "is the one your enemy never sees coming." As the sun dipped below the mountains, Steel-Eye Thorne prepared to demonstrate just how true those words were. The time for hiding was over. Shadow Creek was about to learn why their scholarly sheriff's name had once made hardened killers wake screaming in the night. The confusion shown by Martha's Chinese commands and Katie's strategic bell ringing had its intended effect. Ramirez stepped out of the general store, his Winchester raised as he tried to locate the source of the foreign shouts. The setting sun cast long shadows across Main Street, making every darkened doorway a potential threat. "Boss?" Ramirez called out, his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty. "Something ain't—" The word died in his throat as Thorne's first move revealed itself. The steel shutters Emma had prepared crashed down over the saloon's windows with a thunderous bang, trapping Jackson Bishop inside. Simultaneously, Martha Wu's voice shifted to a different position, now seeming to come from behind the livery stable, making it impossible for the gang to pinpoint her location. Ramirez spun toward the noise, his Winchester tracking the sound. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Thorne moved like liquid shadow, emerging from his hiding place with the fluid grace of a born killer. His first shot came from hip level, the Colt seeming to materialize in his hand rather than be drawn. "Always control the first move," he'd told Katie during their lessons. "It sets the tone for everything that follows." The bullet caught Ramirez just above his gun belt, spinning him around before he could level his Winchester. The scout's dying cry was lost in the echo of the gunshot bouncing off the buildings. Inside the saloon, Jackson Bishop's reaction revealed his experience. Instead of wasting bullets on the steel shutters, He immediately dove behind the reinforced bar, dragging Sarah Hayes with him as a shield. "Wesley!" he shouted, but the street noise made it impossible to know if his brother could hear him. Wesley Bishop, caught in the open on his horse, demonstrated far less tactical sense. He fired wildly at shadows, his ivory-handled Colt spitting flame as Martha's voice seemed to come from yet another direction. His horse, panicked by the gunfire, reared and nearly threw him. Thorne was already moving, using the confusion to slip through the back alleys he'd spent months memorizing. In the dying light, his dark clothes made him nearly invisible as he worked his way toward his next position. Through the gaps between buildings, he could see big Mike O'Malley and the kid Sullivan racing back from the church, having found it empty. Dr. Crawford watched from his surgery window as Ramirez's body collapsed in the street. "First blood," he muttered, arranging his surgical instruments with practiced efficiency. "Now we'll see if they break, or rally." Inside the general store, Samuel Hayes held his granddaughter Katie close, both of them listening to the chaos erupting outside. "Remember what the sheriff taught you," he whispered, feeling the derringer pressed against his side where Katie still gripped it. "Sometimes the best fight is the one you avoid." Jackson Bishop's voice boomed from inside the saloon, carrying notes of both rage and calculation. "Whoever's out there, you just signed your death warrant. I've got your pretty barmaid here, and I'll start taking pieces off her if you don't show yourself." Emma Lancaster, still hidden in the back room, caught Thorne's eye through a carefully prepared gap in the wall. She gestured subtly, indicating that Bishop was keeping Sarah Hayes between himself and the front door, exactly as they'd anticipated. Thorne nodded once. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The kid Sullivan proved his inexperience by running straight down the middle of the street toward the saloon. O'Malley, showing more sense, tried to stick to the shadows of the boardwalk. Neither of them noticed how the street's layout had been subtly altered over the past 3 months. Certain barrels moved, certain sight lines blocked, creating a deadly maze that Thorne knew by heart. Another shot rang out, this one from Martha's position above. The Henry rifle barked once, the bullet striking the ground at Wesley Bishop's horse's feet. The animal reared again, this time successfully throwing its rider. Wesley landed hard, his prized ivory-handled Colt skittering across the dirt. "Like my father taught me," Martha whispered, working Henry's lever action. "Sometimes the threat of the bullet works better than the bullet itself." Thorne moved through the gathering darkness like a ghost, his steel-gray eyes catching what little light remained. Every step had been planned, every angle considered. In the war, they'd called him Steel Eye, not just for his accuracy, but for his ability to see paths of attack that others missed. He reached his next position just as the kid Sullivan approached the saloon's front door. The young gunman was about to learn the hardest lesson of his short career. Sometimes the most obvious path was also the deadliest. Thorne's second Colt cleared leather as smoothly as the first had, its branded grip catching the last ray of sunlight. "The difference between a gunfighter and a gunslinger," he'd once told Katie, "is that a gunfighter shoots to prove something. A gunslinger shoots to end something." As the sun finally set behind the mountains, Steel Eye Thorne prepared to demonstrate the difference. Shadow Creek was about to witness firsthand why his name had once been whispered around campfires like a prayer to ward off death itself. The last light of day faded from Shadow Creek as the kid Sullivan reached for the saloon door, his young face reflected in the darkened windows. Behind him, Big Mike O'Malley moved with surprising stealth for a man his size, using the shadows of the boardwalk for cover. Neither man saw Thorne's shadow detach itself from the darkness between buildings. "First rule of survival," Thorne's voice carried across the empty street, stopping Sullivan in his tracks. "Never be predictable." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing off the buildings in the growing darkness. Sullivan spun, his gun clearing leather with the flashy speed of youth. His shot went wide, splintering wood where Thorne had been a heartbeat before. "Second rule," Thorne's voice came from a different direction now, making both men turn again. "Know when you're outmatched." His Colt barked twice in rapid succession. The first bullet took Sullivan's gun hand, sending his weapon spinning away into the darkness. The second caught O'Malley in the shoulder as the big man tried to bring his shotgun to bear, the impact spinning him off the boardwalk. Inside the saloon, Jackson Bishop heard his men's cries of pain. "Whoever's out there," he shouted, pressing his gun harder against Sarah Hayes's temple. "You're signing these people's death warrants. Show yourself." "Third rule," Thorne's voice replied, closer now. "Never threaten what a man's willing to die protecting." Before Bishop could react, the back window of the saloon exploded inward. Martha Wu's Henry rifle spoke again, the bullet striking the mirror behind the bar with surgical precision. In the chaos of falling glass, Emma Lancaster activated the second set of mechanisms Thorne had installed. Steel shutters slammed down over the back windows and doors, sealing the saloon completely. "Like a trap for tigers," Martha whispered, working Henry's lever action. "Corner them, then wait." Wesley Bishop had regained his feet, blood running from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the ground. His prized ivory-handled Colt lay in the dirt several yards away, gleaming faintly in the starlight. He started toward it, then froze as Thorne's voice came again. "Fourth rule. Pride kills faster than bullets." The words hung in the air like smoke. "That gun is not worth dying for, boy." Wesley's face contorted with rage. "Show yourself, coward. Face me like a man." He dove for his weapon, rolling and coming up firing. His shots lit up the darkness, revealing nothing but empty shadows. "Fifth rule," Thorne's voice was behind him now. "Never waste ammunition on shadows." The last word ended with the explosive report of a Colt. Wesley Bishop screamed as a bullet shattered his knee, his ivory-handled revolver falling from nerveless fingers as he collapsed. Dr. Crawford watched from his surgery window as O'Malley dragged himself toward an alley, leaving a dark trail in the dirt. Sullivan cradled his ruined hand, all pretense of being a hardened gunman gone from his young face. "He's hurting them," the doctor realized, remembering similar tactics from the war, like a wolf separating the weak from the strong. Inside the general store, Katie Hayes felt her grandfather tense as Wesley Bishop's scream echoed through the town. "The sheriff's not killing them," she whispered, understanding dawning in her young mind. "He's making examples of them." Samuel nodded, pride mixing with fear in his voice. "He's showing the ones on the ridge what happens when you threaten his town." They both knew the riflemen were still up there, watching their companions fall one by one. In the saloon, Jackson Bishop's composure was cracking. Sarah Hayes remained held firmly against him as a shield, but his eyes darted between the steel-covered windows and doors. "You think these tricks make you a big man?" he shouted. "I've got hostages. You hear me? Their blood's on your hands." "Final rule." Thorne's voice seemed to come from inside the saloon itself, though no one could see him. "Never play your last card too early." In his words, Emma Lancaster triggered the last of his preparations. The reinforced sections of the bar top suddenly swung up on hidden hinges, providing perfect cover. Sarah Hayes, who had been positioned precisely for this moment, dove behind them as Bishop's gun roared uselessly. Outside, Wesley Bishop crawled toward his fallen brother's ivory-handled Colt, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. "Still trying to prove something, boy?" Thorne's voice held a note of what might have been pity. "Some lessons have to be learned the hard way." The night had fully claimed Shadow Creek now, the only illumination coming from the stars and the occasional muzzle flash as the Bishop gang fired at phantoms. Thorne moved through the darkness like a creature born to it, his steel-gray eyes reflecting what little light remained. Every shot he fired found its mark with mechanical precision, wounding rather than killing, each bullet delivering a message to the riflemen on the ridge. "In the Ghost Riders," he had told Emma during one of their late-night conversations, "we learned that fear was a more effective weapon than death. Dead men tell no tales, but wounded men spread warnings." As if to emphasize his point, the kid Sullivan's voice cracked with pain and terror. "He's not human. He can't be human." The young gunman's cries echoed off the buildings, carrying clearly to where his companions watched helplessly from the ridge. In the deepening night, Shadow Creek was about to learn why Steel Eye Thorne had become a legend. and why some legends were born not from how many men they killed, but from how they chose to show mercy. The night air carried the metallic scent of blood and gun smoke as Shadow Creek's streets fell momentarily silent. Wesley Bishop lay cursing in the dirt, his shattered knee preventing any escape. The Kid Sullivan had backed himself into a corner of the boardwalk, his ruined hand clutched to his chest, while big Mike O'Malley's massive form was slumped in an alley, his shotgun abandoned beside him. Inside the saloon, Jackson Bishop's voice had lost its earlier bravado. "What are you?" he called out, the words carrying a tremor he couldn't quite hide. "Show yourself." His only answer was the creaking of wooden boards as unseen movement circled the building. From her position behind the reinforced bar, Sarah Hayes watched through a carefully prepared gun port as Bishop's composure continued to crack. The notorious gang leader's eyes darted between the steel-covered windows and the shadows that seemed to shift in impossible ways. "Your men are down." Thorne's voice materialized from nowhere and everywhere. "Your riflemen on the ridge haven't fired a shot. Ask yourself why." The words hung in the air like smoke, each syllable calculated to increase Bishop's growing fear. Martha Wu's voice rang out again in Chinese, this time from a completely different direction than before. On cue, Katie Hayes began ringing the church bell in that irregular pattern that made it impossible to track its true source. The combination of foreign commands and disorienting sounds had a devastating effect on the remaining gang members' nerves. "Ghost Riders," Wesley Bishop gasped from his position in the street, recognition and terror mixing in his voice. "The brand on his gun. He's one of them." His words carried to the ridge where his two companions watched helplessly as their plan unraveled. Dr. Crawford moved silently through the shadows, reaching big Mike O'Malley's position. The huge man didn't resist as the doctor began treating his shoulder wound. "Your boss should have checked the wanted posters more carefully," Crawford said quietly as he worked. "Might have recognized the new sheriff's eyes." "Steel Eye Thorne," O'Malley muttered through clenched teeth, "though he died at Dead Horse Canyon with the rest of them." "Sometimes living is the harder path," Crawford replied, echoing Thorne's words as he bandaged the wound. "Sometimes a man has to die to become something better." Inside the saloon, Emma Lancaster caught Jackson Bishop off guard by speaking from her hidden position. "You know what your mistake was?" Her voice was steady, confident. "You saw a quiet town and thought it meant weakness. Never occurred to you that some wolves choose to guard the flock." Bishop fired in the direction of her voice, the bullet embedding harmlessly in the reinforced wall. The shot cost him. In that moment of distraction, Sarah Hayes slipped completely behind the fortified section of the bar, leaving him without a hostage. "No!" Bishop's composure shattered entirely. He fired randomly now, each shot revealing more of his growing panic. "Come face me like a man." "A man?" Thorne's voice held a dangerous edge. "Men don't threaten innocent people. Men don't burn towns for pleasure. You wanted the legend of Steel Eye Thorne? Congratulations, you found him." The words were still echoing when the oil lamps in the saloon suddenly went dark, plunging the interior into absolute blackness. Emma had reached the hidden valve that controlled the fuel lines, another of Thorne's careful preparations. In the street, the Kid Sullivan's nerve finally broke. "I surrender!" he shouted, his young voice cracking. "Please, I don't want to die like this." "Smart boy," Thorne's voice came from the darkness. "Dr. Crawford will tend your hand. You'll live to remember this night, to tell others what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness." On the ridge, the two riflemen watched as their companions were systematically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't see. One of them raised his Winchester, trying to catch any movement in the streets below. "I wouldn't." Martha Wu's voice came from directly behind them. Both men spun to find her Henry rifle unwavering, aimed at the space between them. "The sheriff thought you might try something foolish. That's why he sent me up here an hour ago." Inside the pitch-black saloon, Jackson Bishop heard something that turned his blood to ice. The sound of boots on wooden floorboards, moving with deliberate slowness toward his position. He fired toward the noise, but the muzzle flash only served to blind him further. "Your gang threatened my town," Thorne's voice was closer now, carrying the cold finality of a judge's gavel. You held a gun to people under my protection. Where I come from, that calls for a reckoning. The darkness erupted in a brilliant flash as Thorne's Colt roared. Bishop screamed as a bullet found his gun hand with surgical precision. His weapon clattered to the floor as he clutched his ruined fingers to his chest. The legend you were so eager to meet? Thorne's voice held no mercy now. He died at Dead Horse Canyon. The man who replaced him is something far more dangerous, a killer who chose to become a protector. The night had transformed Shadow Creek into a battlefield where justice was delivered not through death, but through the carefully measured application of fear and pain. Steel Eye Thorne's legend was about to grow, not for the lives he took, but for the ones he chose to spare. The night settled over Shadow Creek like a burial shroud, broken only by occasional moans from the wounded Bishop gang members scattered through the streets. Jackson Bishop stood in the darkened saloon, his shattered hand cradled against his chest, listening to the deliberate footsteps that circled his position like a wolf stalking wounded prey. You want to know something interesting about Dead Horse Canyon? Thorne's voice emerged from the darkness, each word measured and precise. 15 ghost riders went in that day. Official reports say none walked out, but they never found all the bodies, did they? Movement in the shadows made Bishop fire wildly with his remaining good hand, the muzzle flash momentarily illuminating empty air. His shot was answered by the methodical sound of a Colt being cocked. The papers called it a massacre, Thorne continued, his voice shifting position again. They were right about that part. But they got the story wrong. It wasn't the Rangers who did the killing. A bitter laugh echoed through the darkness. Mason Cross sold us out for a badge and a pardon, gave the Rangers our location, then opened fire on his own men while they slept. On the ridge, Martha Wu's Henry rifle kept the 2 remaining gang members covered as they lay face down in the dirt. The sheriff says you have a choice, she informed them coolly. Ride out now, spread the word about what happened here, or join your friends down there. Choose wisely. Dr. Crawford worked his way through the wounded, his experienced hands treating each injury with professional detachment. The kid? Sullivan whimpered as the doctor examined his ruined hand. Will I ever shoot again? That's the point, son, Crawford replied, not unkindly. The sheriff could have killed you. Instead, he gave you a chance to choose a different path. He glanced at big Mike O'Malley, who sat silently watching the scene unfold. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Wesley Bishop had dragged himself to the boardwalk, leaving a trail of blood from his shattered knee. His prized ivory-handled Colt lay forgotten in the street, no longer the symbol of power he'd once imagined it to be. Jackson, he called out to his brother. Jackson, for God's sake, surrender. Inside the saloon, Emma Lancaster and Sarah Hayes remained safely behind the reinforced bar, watching through the gun ports as Thorne's shadow moved with fluid grace through the darkness. Years of working in frontier saloons had taught Emma to read men's breaking points. Jackson Bishop was reaching him. I survived Dead Horse Canyon. Thorne's voice carried an edge that made Bishop's spine crawl. Watched my friends die betrayed by a man they trusted. Spent 3 days in that canyon, using skills meant for killing to keep myself alive. When I finally walked out, I made a promise. Bishop fired again, his last bullet spending itself uselessly in the darkness. The empty click of his hammer was answered by Thorne's voice, now directly behind him. I promised I'd never kill for profit again. Never use my skills to terrorize the innocent. The man who walked out of that canyon wasn't the same one who walked in. The cold press of a gun barrel against Bishop's neck made him freeze. The Ghost Riders died that day, but something else was born. Something that uses death's skills to protect life. Through the window of his surgery, Dr. Crawford watched as the 2 riflemen from the ridge rode hard out of town, their horses' hooves fading into the night. Martha Wu appeared silently beside him, her Henry rifle still warm. "They'll spread the word," she said quietly. "Just like he planned." Crawford nodded, remembering similar nights during the war, when psychological warfare had proved more effective than bullets. "Fear travels faster than lead," he murmured, "and leaves deeper scars." Katie Hayes peered out from the general store's window, watching as her town's defenders emerged from their hidden positions. The night had transformed Shadow Creek, revealing strengths its people hadn't known they possessed. She thought about the shooting lessons Thorne had given her, understanding now that he'd been teaching more than just aim. "A bullet can stop a man," he'd told her, "but wisdom can stop a fight before it begins." In the saloon, Jackson Bishop finally broke. "What do you want from me, Bree?" "Rari Durad and Ditiasir. As a tid a quarter red send dippers in trendy rays." Shad's voice cracking with fear and pain. "Want?" Thorne's voice held a trace of what might have been pity. "I want you to live, Jackson. Live and remember this night. Remember how it feels to be helpless, at the mercy of someone more powerful. Remember what it's like to face a predator who chooses not to kill." The sound of a gun being holstered seemed unnaturally loud in the darkness. "You'll carry that memory like I carry Dead Horse Canyon. Every time your hand aches, every time you think about returning to your old ways, you'll remember the night you met the man Steel Eye Thorne became." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the drama playing out beneath them. Shadow Creek had been transformed by violence into something stronger, its people united by the knowledge that their quiet sheriff was more than he appeared. But none of them, not even Emma Lancaster, could have guessed the full weight of the choice Thorne was making, sparing lives he could have easily taken, turning enemies into unwitting messengers of his legend. Dawn broke over Shadow Creek, painting the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. Lucas Steel Eye Thorne stood on the boardwalk outside his office, watching as Dr. Crawford's wagon carried the wounded Bishop gang members toward the county jail in Preston's Crossing. Jackson Bishop sat among them, his bandaged hand a permanent reminder of the night's events. His brother Wesley lay on a pallet in the wagon bed, his shattered knee ensuring he'd never again threaten an innocent town. By sunset, every outlaw camp from here to the territory line will know what happened, how the Bishop gang rode into Shadow Creek and met something they weren't prepared for. The town was coming back to life, its people emerging from their hiding places to find their home, changed, but unbroken. Martha Wu swept her boardwalk with precise strokes, her Henry rifle once again hidden beneath innocent stacks of laundry. Samuel Hayes opened his store, the bell chiming cheerfully, as if the previous night had been nothing but a bad dream. Big Mike O'Malley had surprised them all by surrendering himself formally to Thorne's custody. "Ain't no percentage in running from a man like you," he'd said as Crawford bandaged his shoulder. "Reckon I'd rather face a judge than wonder if Steel Eye's behind every shadow." Katie Hayes appeared from the general store, carrying a fresh pot of coffee for the men who'd worked through the night securing the prisoners. Her movements showed a new confidence born from the knowledge that she'd played her part in defending her town. "You taught us more than just defense," she said, pouring Thorne a fresh cup. "You showed us how to be strong without becoming cruel." Thorne studied her young face, seeing shadows of his own past choices reflected there. "The hardest lesson I learned at Dead Horse Canyon wasn't about shooting," he replied. "It was about the weight of mercy. Sometimes sparing a life teaches more than taking one." Pastor Wright emerged from his church, where he'd spent the night comforting those who'd sought shelter in the basement. The morning bell rang out clear and strong, no longer a signal of danger but a call to prayer. The sound carried across Shadow Creek, marking the transition from darkness back to light. "Your secret's out now," Emma observed, watching townspeople pass by, their eyes carrying a new respect when they looked at their sheriff. "They know who you really are." Thorne shook his head slightly. "They know who I was, who I am." He paused, considering his words carefully. "Who I am is the man who chose to protect rather than destroy. Steel Eye Thorne died in Dead Horse Canyon. The man who walked out became something else. Sarah Hayes approached, carrying fresh bread from the bakery. The experience of being held hostage had left its mark, but there was steel in her spine as she faced Thorne. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for saving me, but for showing us that even the darkest past can lead to a righteous future." Dr. Crawford returned from seeing off the wagons, his medical bag lighter after treating the night's casualties. "Not a single death," he remarked, the observation carrying weight beyond the obvious. "In all my years of war, I never saw such precise violence, every shot calculated, every wound meant to teach rather than kill. The Ghost Riders taught me how to deal death," Thorne replied, his voice carrying echoes of old pain. "Dead Horse Canyon taught me why I shouldn't. Shadow Creek," he looked around at the town he'd chosen to protect. "Shadow Creek taught me what to do with those skills instead." Martha Wu joined them, her usual graceful movements showing no sign of her night spent on the ridge. "My father would say you've found balance," she offered, using darkness to defend the light. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Shadow Creek bustled with activity as people reclaimed their town, stronger for having faced down evil and emerged victorious. The legend of Steel Eye Thorne would grow from this night, but not in the way anyone might have expected. "They'll be telling stories about this night," Emma said, watching the town come back to life. "About the sheriff, who was really a legendary gunslinger. About how he could have killed them all but chose not to." Thorne stood silently for a moment, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the morning light. "Let them tell the stories," he finally said. "But make sure they tell the right one. Not about a killer who found redemption, but about a town that gave him something worth protecting." The morning stage arrived right on schedule, carrying mail and travelers unaware of the drama that had unfolded during the night. Shadow Creek had changed, its people bonded by shared danger and triumph. They had seen their scholarly sheriff transformed into something legendary, only to choose again the path of peace. Steel Eye Thorne's legend would indeed grow, but as a protector rather than a killer, a guardian who proved that the most fearsome predator was the one who chose not to kill. A week after the Bishop Gang's defeat, Shadow Creek found itself facing an unexpected challenge. Word of Steel Eye Thorne's reappearance had spread like wildfire across the territory, drawing a different kind of visitor. 3 young gunslingers had arrived on the afternoon stage, their intentions clear from the way they seized up the town and its now famous sheriff. Thorne watched them from his office, his steel-gray eyes tracking their movements as they swaggered toward the saloon. They couldn't have been more than 25, reminding him painfully of faces he'd seen in Dead Horse Canyon. Young men too eager to make their mark, too blind to see the price of glory. "More trouble," Emma Lancaster reported, bringing Thorne his afternoon coffee. "They're asking questions about that night, about how one man took down the Bishop Gang." She studied his face, seeing the weight of responsibility there. "They're wearing guns despite my rules against it." "Like moths to flame," Thorne murmured, his fingers unconsciously tracing the Ghost Rider's brand on his gun grip. It was the same after Dead Horse Canyon. Every hot-blooded kid with a gun wanted to test himself against the legend. Martha Wu paused in sweeping her boardwalk, her movement still carrying the grace that had helped save the town. "This isn't Dead Horse Canyon," she said quietly. "You're not alone this time." Dr. Crawford emerged from his clinic, his medical bag in hand. He'd taken to carrying it more often lately, ever since word of the Bishop Gang's defeat had started drawing attention. "Had a talk with them earlier," he reported. "They think the stories are exaggerated, want to prove themselves against the famous Steel Eye Thorne." A ghost of a smile touched Thorne's lips. "Glory seekers never understand. Real gunfighters don't seek fights. They end them." His eyes tracked the youngest of the 3 as the man practiced quick draws when he thought no one was watching. "And real legends are born from the fights we choose not to have." Katie Hayes appeared from the general store, chest set tucked under her arm. Over the past week, their daily games had become a symbol of the town's return to normalcy. But today, Thorne shook his head. "Not now, Katie. I need you to do something more important." He kept his voice low, Tell your grandfather to close the store. Have Martha bring her rifle to the back room, like before." The girl's eyes widened, but she nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As she hurried off, Thorne stood, his movements deliberate despite the weight of what was to come. He could feel his guns beneath his coat, but he walked past them where they hung on their pegs. "You're going out there unarmed?" Dr. Crawford asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Sometimes the bravest thing a gunfighter can do is choose not to fight," Thorne replied. "These boys don't need another lesson in killing. They need a lesson in living." The three gunslingers waited outside the saloon, their hands hovering near their holsters. The youngest stepped forward as Thorne approached, his face flushed with excitement or whiskey or both. "So you're the famous Steel Eye," he called out. "The ghost who broke the Bishop gang. Don't look so fearsome to me." Thorne stopped in the middle of the street, his presence somehow filling the space despite his relaxed posture. 20 years ago, I watched young men like you die in a canyon far from home," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "They died believing a fast gun made them immortal. It didn't." The oldest of the three laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. "Pretty words from a man who crippled 7 men last week." "I wounded them because I had to," Thorne replied evenly. "You're here because you want to. That's the difference between necessity and foolishness." His hands hung loosely at his sides, far from any weapon. "I won't draw on you. I won't give you the glory you're seeking. If you want to shoot an unarmed man, go ahead. But remember, I didn't reach my age by being easy to kill." The moment stretched like a bowstring pulled too tight. Behind his office window, Martha Wu kept her Henry rifle trained on the scene. Emma Lancaster's hand rested near the lever that would drop the saloon's steel shutters. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the youngest gunman's hand moved toward his revolver. Before he could clear leather, Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. "Dead Horse Canyon." The words froze them in place, confusion warring with recognition. 15 men died that night, Thorne continued, his voice heavy with memory. Died believing their guns made them something special. Their bones are still there, bleaching in the sun, teaching a lesson no one seems to learn. The oldest gunslinger studied Thorne's face, seeing something there that made him step back. "Come on, boys," he said quietly. "This ain't the kind of fight we're looking for." As they walked toward the stage depot, Thorne remained in the street, his presence a reminder of battles fought and wisdom hard won. The town slowly came back to life around him. Sarah Hayes sweeping her porch, Martha Wu returning to her laundry, Dr. Crawford putting away his medical bag. Katie approached with the chess set. "How did you know they wouldn't shoot?" Thorne settled into his chair, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Because sometimes, girl, the hardest battle is choosing not to fight at all. That's a lesson worth more than any legend." A month after the Bishop gang's defeat, autumn painted Shadow Creek's surrounding mountains in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Lucas Steel Eye Thorne sat at his desk, the morning sun warming his back as he worked through his daily reports. His guns hung on their legs behind him, no longer a secret, but no longer a burden either. The would-be challengers had stopped coming after word spread about the 3 gunslingers who'd left without firing a shot. Instead, different visitors began arriving. Lawmen seeking advice, towns requesting help with troublemakers, and sometimes lost souls looking for the same redemption Thorne had found. Another letter came, Katie Hayes said, bringing in the morning mail. "From that young deputy in Prescott. Says the training you gave him saved his town last week." She sorted through the stack with practiced efficiency, having taken on more responsibilities since that fateful night. Thorne nodded, watching Shadow Creek come to life through his window. Emma Lancaster had transformed her saloon into an unofficial gathering place for peace officers, where experience and wisdom were shared over coffee instead of whiskey. Martha Wu's laundry now housed a small shooting school, where she taught the careful arts of defense to those Thorne deemed worthy. The Bishop gang's trial ended yesterday, Dr. Crawford reported, entering with his morning paper. Jackson and Wesley got 20 years. The kid serving his sentence working at the prison hospital. Seems that night changed more lives than just his. Change is funny that way, Thorne replied, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the morning light. Sometimes it takes a brush with darkness to show us a better path. He touched the Ghost Rider's brand on his gun grip, the symbol no longer a mark of shame, but a reminder of how far he'd come. Sarah Hayes appeared with fresh coffee, moving with the confidence of someone who'd faced their fears and emerged stronger. Pastor Wright says the church has never been fuller, she remarked. People coming from all over, hoping to hear the story of how Shadow Creek transformed its devil into its guardian angel. A ghost of a smile touched Thorne's lips. Devils and angels. People always want simple stories. Truth is usually more complicated. Like a sheriff who used to be a gunslinger? Katie asked, setting up their daily chess game. Or a town that learned to defend itself instead of hiding? Exactly. Thorne moved his first pawn, remembering similar games played in calmer times. Dead Horse Canyon taught me that a man can change his path. Shadow Creek taught me why he should. Emma Lancaster entered, carrying letters from other frontier towns seeking advice on self-defense. You've started something bigger than just our town, she observed. People are learning there's a middle ground between violence and vulnerability. Outside, Shadow Creek bustled with activity. Samuel Hayes directed the construction of new buildings, the town growing as its reputation for safety drew honest settlers. Martha Wu trained a group of deputies from neighboring communities, their badges catching the sunlight as they practiced her careful arts of observation. My father would say you've achieved balance, Martha said later, joining Thorne on his evening walk. The skills that once made you feared now make you respected. The legend that once haunted you now protects others. The setting sun painted Shadow Creek in shades of gold, its light catching the silver star on Thorne's chest. He'd walked into Dead Horse Canyon as a killer and emerged as something else. He'd arrived in Shadow Creek seeking anonymity and found purpose instead. You know what I learned? He said quietly, watching families stroll without fear through streets that had once seen so much violence. The most powerful legend isn't the one that makes men tremble. It's the one that gives them hope. Katie Hayes rang the evening church bell, its clear tones carrying across the peaceful town. Shadow Creek had changed, its people bound together by shared trials and triumph. They'd seen their quiet sheriff transformed into something legendary, only to choose again the path of peace. Steel-Eye Thorne's legend would indeed grow, but not as a tale of death and vengeance. Instead, it would be told as a story of redemption, of a predator who became a protector, of a town that proved that the strongest wolves are the ones who choose to guard the flock. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting Shadow Creek in shades of purple and gold. Lucas Steel-Eye Thorne stood on his office porch watching his town settle into the evening. His guns hung behind him, tools now of protection rather than destruction. The Ghost Rider's brand on their grips no longer burned with shame, but glowed with promise. A reminder that even the darkest past could lead to a righteous future. Up next, we've got 2 more unforgettable stories right on your screen. If this one touched your heart, you won't want to miss these. Just click and see for yourself, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update from us.